Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. Emma adjusted the hem of her cardigan, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of a frayed thread as she settled into the cozy nook of her family's sunlit kitchen. It was an early autumn afternoon, and the air was filled with the earthy aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Liam, her 12-year-old son, sat at the dining table, intently sketching what looked like an elaborate maze of overlapping lines and shapes. He called it his dream world, a place of secret tunnels and hidden treasures. Emma smiled at his focus, feeling a flicker of pride in his quiet brilliance. The knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Wiping her hands on a dish towel, she called out, "Coming!" She wasn't expecting anyone, but in their tight-knit neighborhood, surprise visits weren't uncommon. Opening the door, Emma was greeted by Sophia's familiar face, her closest family friend of nearly 2 decades. Sophia's expression was unusually tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. She held a large envelope in her hands, clutching it as though it might escape. "Hey, Sophia," Emma said, trying to sound cheerful. "What brings you here?" Sophia hesitated. "Emma, I need to talk to you. Can we sit down?" Emma's stomach tightened. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. Liam glanced up as they entered the kitchen, his gaze flickering curiously between the two women. "Sweetheart, why don't you work on that upstairs for a bit?" Emma suggested gently. "I'll call you for dinner." Liam frowned but nodded, gathering his notebook and pencils. "Okay, Mom," he said, shuffling out of the room. Once they were alone, Sophia placed the envelope on the table. She sighed deeply, brushing her auburn hair back from her face. "Emma, this isn't easy for me, but I feel like you have the right to know." Emma frowned, her heart thudding in her chest. "Know what?" Sophia pushed the envelope toward her. "Just look." With trembling fingers, Emma pulled out the contents. An old photograph, slightly yellowed at the edges. It showed her husband, Jake, leaning casually against a sleek sports car. Beside him was a woman Emma didn't recognize, blonde, elegant, her hand resting intimately on Jake's arm. They looked happy. Too happy. "What is this?" Emma whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "Where did you get this?" "I've been sitting on it for months," Sophia admitted. "But last week, I overheard something at a fundraiser. People were talking about Jake, about how he's been seen with her." Emma's hands tightened around the photo. "Who is she?" Sophia's expression softened with sorrow. "Her name is Vanessa Green. She's been linked to Jake for years. Emma, I think they've been living a double life." The words hung in the air, a sharp and bitter accusation. Emma felt like the ground beneath her had shifted, her entire world cracking open. "You're sure about this?" Sophia nodded, her eyes glistening. "I wouldn't have come if I wasn't." Emma stared at the photo again, the image burning into her mind. Jake's familiar smile now seemed like the grin of a stranger. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't want to hurt you," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "But then I thought about Liam. You deserve the truth for his sake too. The truth." The word felt like a heavy weight pressing on Emma's chest. She leaned back in her chair, her thoughts racing. Jake's late nights at the office, the unexplained business trips, the distant look in his eyes when she asked him about his day. It all began to add up in painful clarity. Tears threatened to spill, but Emma blinked them away. "I don't know what to do," she murmured. "You don't have to decide anything now," Sophia said firmly. "Just take some time. Think about your next steps." Emma nodded, gripping the edge of the table for support. For Liam's sake, she needed to hold herself together. But inside, the cracks were spreading, and she knew that this photo was only the beginning of a much larger, darker story waiting to unfold. For the next few days, Emma moved through her life in a daze, her mind swirling with questions and possibilities. The photograph haunted her, a persistent whisper in the back of her thoughts. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Jake slept soundly beside her. Unaware of the storm brewing in her heart, she needed answers, but the idea of confronting Jake outright felt impossible. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, Emma began to observe her husband more carefully, looking for clues in his behavior. And that was when she noticed how his perfect facade, so seamless for years, began to crack in subtle but undeniable ways. Jake came home late that Wednesday, his usual confident stride slightly hurried as he entered the house. Emma was in the living room, folding laundry, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked up as he walked in, offering a smile she didn't quite feel. "Busy day?" she asked, keeping her voice even. "Exhausting," Jake replied, loosening his tie. "The new deal with the investors has been a nightmare. Just glad it's almost wrapped up." Emma nodded, filing away his words. Jake had mentioned this deal before, but the vagueness of his updates left her suspicious. He didn't offer specifics anymore, and when she asked, his answers felt rehearsed, as though he were reciting lines from a script. She forced herself to remain calm. Pressing too hard now might alert him, and she needed more than suspicions to face him. The next morning, Emma decided to search for something, anything, that could confirm or disprove Sophia's claim. She waited until Jake left for work, his usual peck on the cheek feeling colder than usual. Once the door shut behind him, Emma went to their shared office. Jake's desk was immaculate, as always. He prided himself on order, every file neatly stacked and every drawer organized. Yet as Emma rifled through the papers, she found nothing unusual. Bills, business contracts, receipts, all meticulously cataloged. But then, her eyes fell on his laptop, its sleek black surface reflecting the sunlight streaming through the window. Jake always kept it password protected, but Emma had watched him type in the code dozens of times without thinking much of it. She hesitated for a moment, then tapped in the sequence. Liam's birthday. The lock screen vanished, and Emma exhaled in relief. She began scrolling through his emails, her heart pounding. Most of it was work, but one email thread stood out. A message from someone named VM. The subject line read, "Looking forward to seeing you." Emma clicked on it, her hands trembling. The email was brief but damning. "Vanessa Green, last night was perfect. I can't wait for our next trip. Tell me when you're free." Her breath caught in her throat. She scrolled through the chain of emails, each one more incriminating than the last. Mentions of secret rendezvous, weekend getaways, and cryptic references to their future plans painted a picture too vivid to deny. Emma closed the laptop, her chest tightening. She felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. The emails weren't just evidence of an affair. They were proof that Jake had built an entirely separate life with this woman. Her fingers gripped the edge of the desk as she tried to steady herself. For the rest of the day, Emma struggled to maintain her composure. Liam came home from school excited about an upcoming science fair, and she smiled and nodded as he chattered on about his project. But inside, she felt like a hollow shell, her thoughts racing as she tried to make sense of what she'd found. When Jake came home that evening, Emma studied him closely. His charm, his easy smile, they now seemed like a mask, and she could no longer unsee the cracks in it. Over dinner, he spoke about his day, recounting meetings and deadlines, but Emma barely heard him. She nodded and smiled in all the right places, playing her role as the devoted wife and the emails pressing on her. Later that night, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Jake's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she saw his quick glance at the screen and the way he picked up the phone, angling it away from her. She couldn't see the message, but his reaction said enough. "I'm gonna call it a night," Emma said, standing up. "I've got an early start tomorrow." Jake barely looked up. "All right, sweetheart. Sleep well." In their bedroom, Emma closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. The evidence was mounting, and the weight of it all was almost too much to bear. She wasn't ready to confront Jake yet, but she knew she couldn't stay silent for long. The cracks in their marriage were widening, and it was only a matter of time before the truth broke through completely. By Friday, Emma felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath her. The photograph and emails had shaken her world, but they also steeled her resolve. And she needed to know just how deep Jake's betrayal went, and whether there was any part of their life together that was still real. As she sipped her coffee in the quiet kitchen that morning, Emma turned over the plan forming in her mind. Jake was scheduled to leave for a weekend work retreat, a regular occurrence she had never questioned before. This time, however, she couldn't shake the suspicion that Vanessa Green might also be in attendance. The thought made her stomach churn, but it also presented an opportunity. After Jake left, Emma dropped Liam off at his best friend's house, explaining vaguely that she had errands to run and might be late picking him up. She wanted to shield him from as much of the chaos as possible until she could figure out her next steps. Her first stop was Sophia's house. Emma's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she pulled into the driveway, her chest tight with a mix of gratitude and trepidation. Sophia had always been a source of comfort, but now she was the bearer of a truth Emma wasn't sure she could handle. Sophia opened the door with a soft, sympathetic smile. "I've been waiting for you," she said, stepping aside to let Emma in. The two women sat at the kitchen table, the same place where they'd shared countless cups of coffee over the years. Today, the warmth of their friendship was tinged with a heavy tension. "I found emails," Emma began, her voice shaky, "between Jake and Vanessa. He's not just having an affair, Sophia. He's building a life with her." Sophia's expression hardened. "I was afraid of that," she said quietly. "Emma, there's more you need to know." Sophia slid her phone across the table, its screen glowing with photos and screenshots. Emma's heart sank as she scanned the images. Jake and Vanessa walking hand in hand through a city Emma didn't recognize, laughing together at what appeared to be a private dinner party. Their bodies close and comfortable in a way that spoke volumes. This is from a friend of mine," Sophia explained. "She lives in Chicago." She recognized Jake from the few times I've posted pictures of you two on social media. She told me she'd seen him with Vanessa several times over the past year. Emma's throat tightened. "So it's not just here. He's been flying to her." Sophia nodded. "Emma, I think you need to hire a private investigator. You deserve to know the full truth." The suggestion hung in the air, both terrifying and oddly reassuring. For weeks now, Emma had felt adrift in a sea of half-truths and suspicions. The thought of having concrete answers, no matter how painful, gave her a strange sense of control. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice firmer than before. Sophia reached across the table, taking Emma's hand. "You don't have to go through this alone. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you." Later that afternoon, Emma returned home, her mind racing with the new information. She decided to search the house again, focusing this time on Jake's travel records. If he was lying about work trips, she wanted to know where he was really going, and with whom. In the back of a drawer in Jake's office, Emma found a folder labeled Expenses. Inside were receipts, invoices, and itineraries. At first glance, they seemed innocuous, but as she flipped through them, certain details began to stand out. A receipt for a luxury hotel in Chicago, dated to a weekend Jake had claimed to be in Boston. A dinner bill for two at an upscale restaurant, and an invoice for a high-end jewelry store Emma had never stepped foot in. Her hands trembled as she pieced together the timeline. Jake wasn't just visiting Vanessa. He was showering her with gifts, taking her to places Emma had only dreamed of visiting. The realization was like a knife to her heart. For years, she had supported Jake's ambitions, sacrificing her own dreams to help him build his career. And now, it seemed, he was using their shared success to fund his betrayal. Emma tucked the folder under her arm and went to the bedroom. Pulling her suitcase from the closet, she began packing some essentials, her movements methodical but determined. She didn't know where she was going yet, perhaps a hotel, perhaps Sophia's house, but she couldn't stay here, surrounded by memories that now felt tainted. Just as she was zipping up the suitcase, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jake. "Jake, miss you already. Retreat's been boring so far, but I'll call you tonight." Emma stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. His audacity was breathtaking. She debated ignoring it, but then a thought occurred to her. If Jake was so confident in his lies, perhaps she could use that against him. "Emma, miss you too. Call me when you get a break." She hit send and set the phone down, her mind racing. For now, she would play along, giving him no reason to suspect that she knew the truth. But as the pieces of Jake's betrayal continued to fall into place, Emma felt her anger hardening into resolve. The time for confrontation was approaching, and she intended to be ready. No matter how painful the truth was, she owed it to herself and to Liam to face it head on. By the time Jake called that evening, Emma had rehearsed the conversation a dozen times in her mind. She sat on the edge of their bed, the soft glow of her bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. Her suitcase was hidden in the closet, her emotions tightly leashed. When the phone buzzed on her nightstand, she took a steadying breath before answering. "Hi, honey," she said, keeping her voice light. "Hey, babe," Jake replied, his tone warm and familiar, a cruel mockery of their former intimacy. "How's everything at home? Liam behaving?" Emma's hand tightened around the phone. "He's great. Misses you, of course. How's the retreat?" Jake laughed softly. "Boring as ever. You know how these things go. Endless meetings and small talk. I'd much rather be home with you." Emma forced a laugh. "I'm sure it's exhausting. What kind of meetings are they having you sit through?" "Oh, the usual," Jake replied smoothly. "Strategy sessions, networking events. Nothing too exciting." Emma's heart clenched at the ease with which he lied. "Well, I hope you're getting some rest. You sounded so stressed before you left." "Don't worry about me," Jake said, his voice oozing charm. "I'll be back before you know it." As the call ended, Emma stared at the screen, her chest tight. Every word he'd spoken had been another thread in the tapestry of his deceit. But tonight, she would begin to unravel it. The next day, Emma drove to the address she had copied from one of Jake's hotel receipts. It was a sleek, modern building in the heart of the city, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. She parked across the street, her stomach churning as she watched guests come and go. After an hour of waiting, her patience was rewarded. Jake emerged from the hotel, his arm slung casually around a woman Emma instantly recognized from Sophia's photos. Vanessa Green. The pair walked down the street together, laughing, their bodies close. Emma snapped a series of photos with her phone, each one a fresh wound to her heart. Returning to her car, Emma sat behind the wheel, her hands trembling. The evidence she had gathered was undeniable, but confronting Jake directly still felt like stepping into a storm. She thought of Liam, his quiet innocence, and knew she couldn't delay any longer. It was time to face Jake and demand the truth. That evening, Jake returned home, his usual charismatic demeanor firmly in place. He kissed Emma on the cheek as he walked into the kitchen, tossing his keys onto the counter. "Smells amazing," he said, nodding toward the dinner Emma had prepared. "You didn't have to go all out." "It's just pasta," Emma replied, her tone even. "Thought it would be nice to sit down together after your weekend away." Jake smiled, seemingly oblivious to the tension in her voice. "You're the best." They ate in near silence, Emma's appetite non-existent. Jake, on the other hand, seemed entirely at ease, making small talk about Liam's school projects and the book he'd been reading during his supposed retreat. Emma nodded along, her anger simmering just below the surface. After dinner, she waited until Jake had settled onto the couch with a glass of wine. Then she retrieved the envelope containing the photograph and her printed copies of the emails she had found. She walked into the living room and placed them on the coffee table in front of him. "What's this?" Jake asked, his brow furrowing as he reached for the envelope. "Something we need to talk about," Emma said, crossing her arms. Jake opened the envelope, pulling out the photograph first. His face remained calm, but Emma caught the slight tightening of his jaw as he looked at the image. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice steady. "That's not important," Emma replied. "What matters is the truth, Jake. Who is Vanessa? Jake's eyes flicked to her, a flicker of panic flashing across his face before he masked it with a forced smile. She's just a colleague. We work together sometimes. Really? Emma said, her voice rising. She reached for the emails, tossing them onto the table. Then maybe you can explain these. Jake froze, his wineglass halfway to his lips. He set it down carefully, his movements deliberate. Emma, it's not what it looks like. Then tell me what it is, Emma snapped. Tell me why you've been lying to me, why you've been flying off to see her while I stayed here, holding our family together. Jake sighed, leaning back against the couch. I was going to tell you, he began, his tone defensive. Eventually, it's just complicated. Emma laughed bitterly. Complicated? Is that what you call sneaking around and building a life with another woman? It wasn't like that, Jake insisted, his voice growing sharper. Vanessa and I... Look, it's not serious. It was just something that happened. Something that happened, Emma repeated, her voice shaking with anger. You don't happen into an affair, Jake. You made a choice. Over and over again. Jake stood, running a hand through his hair. What do you want me to say, Emma? That I screwed up? Fine, I did. But do we really have to do this now? Emma stared at him, her fury giving way to a cold clarity. Yes, Jake, we have to do this now, because I deserve better, and so does Liam. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but Emma cut him off. I'm leaving, and when I do, you're going to explain to Liam why his family is falling apart. That's on you. Emma turned and walked away, her heart pounding as she climbed the stairs to their bedroom. She grabbed her suitcase from the closet and didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, she felt free. Free from the lies, the doubt, and the weight of Jake's betrayal. Now it was her turn to decide what came next. Emma sat in the small rental apartment she had moved into just days earlier, gazing out the window at the quiet street below. The space was modest but cozy, with soft yellow walls and a few mismatched pieces of furniture she had picked up at a second-hand store. It wasn't the spacious home she had shared with Jake, but it felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could rebuild. The decision to leave Jake had been terrifying, but as the days passed, Emma felt an unfamiliar sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in years, her life wasn't dictated by someone else's schedule, expectations, or betrayals. She could think clearly, plan deliberately, and focus on what mattered most. Liam. The door to the apartment creaked open, and Liam shuffled inside, his school backpack slung over one shoulder. His expression was cautious, as it had been since the night she told him the truth. Hey, buddy, Emma said gently. How was school? Liam shrugged, dropping his bag by the door. Okay. Mrs. Jeffers liked my project. That's great, Emma said, trying to draw him out. What did your classmates think? They liked it too, Liam said with a small smile, but his eyes darted to the stack of unopened boxes in the corner. Are we going to stay here forever? Emma's heart ached at the question. She knelt in front of him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. I don't know yet, sweetheart. But what I do know is that this is our home now, and we'll make it as nice as we can. Together. Liam nodded, his expression softening. Can I paint my room? Absolutely, Emma said with a smile. You can pick any color you want. For the first time that day, Liam's face brightened. Even green? Even green, Emma said, ruffling his hair. Later that evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Emma sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea. She stared at the notebook in front of her, its blank pages waiting to be filled. Since leaving Jake, she had started keeping a journal, trying to sort through the tangled emotions of the past few weeks. Tonight, her thoughts turned to the future. The divorce proceedings were underway, and though the process was draining, Emma was determined to come out of it with her dignity intact. Jake had tried to spin the narrative in his favor, claiming that Emma was overreacting and that his affair had been a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence Emma had gathered, combined with her lawyer's sharp instincts, made it clear that Jake's deceit ran deeper than he cared to admit. Her lawyer had assured her that she was in a strong position, particularly when it came to custody of Liam. Emma's primary goal was to shield her son from as much of the ugliness as possible. She wanted him to feel loved and supported, no matter how fractured their family had become. She picked up her pen and began to write, her thoughts flowing onto the page. I never thought my life would take this turn, but here I am, standing on unfamiliar ground. I'm scared, yes, but I'm also hopeful. For the first time, I get to decide what my future looks like. I get to choose peace, honesty, and love. For myself and for Liam. Emma set the pen down, feeling a small but fierce spark of determination. She thought about the things she had always wanted to do, but had put aside for Jake's career and their family. Maybe now was the time to revisit those dreams. She had loved teaching, but perhaps it was time to explore a different path, something that was entirely her own. She glanced at the bookshelf, where a thick guide to creative writing sat, unopened since she had bought it years ago. Emma had always loved the idea of telling stories, of putting into words the experiences and emotions that connected people. Maybe it was time to give it a try. The next morning, Emma woke early and made pancakes, something she hadn't done in months. The smell of butter and syrup filled the tiny apartment, and Liam wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Pancakes?" he asked, a note of surprise in his voice. Emma smiled. "I thought we could celebrate a new tradition for our new home." Liam sat at the table, watching her flip the golden discs onto a plate. "Do you think it'll get better?" he asked quietly. Emma set the spatula down and turned to him. "I do," she said firmly. "It'll take time, but we're going to be okay. Better than okay." Liam nodded, his small smile returning. As they ate, Emma felt a warmth spreading in her chest. Their world had been shaken to its core, but here, in this little apartment, they were building something new. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. As the sun streamed through the window, Emma thought about how far she had come. The life she had known was gone, but in its place, she saw the outline of something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of joy.